you could say something.
Yeah, welcome to The Machine Lies, where we talk about the lies of the machine on the machine that lies. And I really appreciate not too many viewers here, but yeah, whoever's out here is going to get a special treat. I mean, in terms of looking at different ideas, and I mean, so I greatly appreciate your time. But yeah, no communication in the chat. Just Frank, I appreciate you. You know, Just Frank was here. Sky Angel was here. She told me, "I hope you have a good day." I greatly appreciate that from Sky Angel. All right, I greatly appreciate your time. Just trying to write and tell me that. I mean, especially when there's such little communication out here, right? But yeah, I greatly appreciate you guys' time. You know, we're gonna move forward here in terms of you know, looking at some of the key points, right, that I think we were making, right, in terms of bringing up the Marx economic and philosophical manuscripts, right, 1888, right, this piece, right, it goes to some of the main points that we've been trying to make, right, about alienation. Exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, get it while it's hot. Right? But yeah, this stuff about alienation, right? Of course, this is a key topic, right, within the manifesto, right, of Uncle Teddy, right? So we got this idea of alienation that he sort of seems to have stolen from German philosophy, right? But of course, he's really taken it from Jacques Ellul, right? This idea of this dual massification and also, atomization of man, right? This dual impact. Well, of course, this is a hallmark of the 16th century, right? And all of its political mishaps, right? The battle or the dialectic between individualism and collectivism, right? That reigned on, right? So we have this battle, right? Okay, mainly based on the notion that man was, on one end, universal, right? Right. That means that he had drawn a complete synthesis of nature, and he was attuned to the spiritual aspects of life, right? So man could both master this world and what's beyond it, right? So this whole idea of the spiritual mastery of man, right, was really a battle between, on the one end, his drive, right, to have universal capacity, right, and to deal in ultimate questions, right, but also another capacity, right, which is a diminution of thoughts, right, onto the material plane, right, and this has to do with um, man as a species being, right. So just as you have the idea of universalism, I greatly appreciate that, Denise. I greatly appreciate that. I mean, okay, just as we have the idea of universalism, right, taking man beyond nature, right? It's having the reason to master nature, right? And connect himself with God, right? So this idea of sublimation of the natural world, right? And this drive towards universalism, right? See, what they should have is a universalism idealized within the individual, right? And the species being that's idealized through the collective, right? But what you have is you have a tension between these two views. One on the one end of man going beyond nature in his universal capacity, and the other of a species being, right? Man being equal, right? And hence being collectivized, right? Having to build civilizations and rely on other people, right? And here you get the notion that mankind was created equal, right? So this idea of equality, right, comes from the sort of rugged individualism that's an offshoot of this idea of universalism, right? Yeah, I haven't begun reading yet. But we will get back into the economic and philosophical manuscripts of Karl Marx, right? Because that's coming back into style, right? And there he deals with the idea of alienation from nature that we were, basically covering within Hegel's phenomenology, right? His ideas of lectures in the history of philosophy, right? And his writing Reason in History, right? So we looked at a few of Hegel's writings, right? And of course, on the one hand, there's this view of man being dislodged from the natural world, right? Which is the spatial dislodging of man, right? Then there's the temporal dislodging of man, right? Within this notion of progress, right? So you have idealism in terms of progress, you have universalism in terms of man being separate from nature. So there's these two different aspects, right? Two different aspects, right? So yeah, so what other ideas did he lay down, right? So not only is this idea of universalism, right? There's a notion of alienation, right? Okay, which is man's separation from nature or man's separation from each other in terms of human society, right? Causing the separation between classes, and then there's an alienation between man and his labor, right? But this separation between man and his labor is actually a separation between man and nature. As Marx talks about how nature becomes the unconscious body of man, right? So nature itself becomes abstracted, right? Because man tries to assimilate nature through his ideas, right? So here you have Hegel's entire formula, right? Which is that man, nature is the antithesis of mind, whose synthesis is man. And then you have the notion by Saint Eusebius, right? In order for man to become like God, God had to become like man, right? So you have those three notions: God, man, and the becoming, right? And in this notion of becoming, right, it's nature that transforms, right? Because God is put into the world of becoming, right, which is the natural world, right? So you have three things within that transaction: God, man, and nature, right? Nature represented by the becoming itself, right? The impermanence, right? The change, right? And finally, you have the notion coming from Feuerbach, right? From Feuerbach, and we're going to get into Feuerbach here, right? That in order to liberate man from the realm of becoming, which is nature, he invented God, right? So you have alienation of man from the natural world. We have nature reborn as an abstraction through the sort of spiritual impulse, right? So you have either the creation of God in order to supplant nature, or the creation of matter to supplant sort of increasing divide between man and nature, right? So yeah, blessings to all the people that are here. Let's get into Feuerbach and how the ideas relate from Feuerbach, right? right? You have Feuerbach, who talks about alienation from God and the invention of either nature or God, right? Alienation from God equals invention of matter, the material world. Alienation from nature equals invention of God, right? This dual formula, right? Then you have Marx, and you have man alienated from the products of his labor, right? I mean, the products of his work, right? So you have that sort of alienation, right? Then you have the alienation in terms of Kaczynski, which is a foggy somatic detachment, which is an extrapolation of the ideas of Ellul, right? Which is basically man feeling as a cog in the machine, foggy somatic detachment, and externalization of the ego based on the mediation of the tools that we use, right? Right. We shape tools, and the tools we use shape us. Right. This dual exchange. Right. So this idea of alienation from the cold metal perfection, right, are the objective factors of power in our age, which are the technological means, right? And the technical necessity, which enslaves man, right? Okay, so we're looking at this idea, or the notion of this idea, alienation, right? Based on, well, it's actually based on this master slave dialectic, right? As well. That has a bit of alienation in it too, right? And of course it has to do with becoming objectified, right? And then becoming sort of material, right? And then becoming estranged, right? From what that material represents, right? So there's sort of 3 steps to this idea of alienation itself, right? Whether you have it in Feuerbach, you have it in Marx, or you have it in Uncle Teddy, right? But you have different ideas about alienation, right? So let's get into Feuerbach, right? And we'll break this down to its very most simplest sort of arrangements here, right? We got a little Pakistani dude I found earlier explaining this, which is really weird, isn't it? Right. Yeah, let me see if I can find this Feuerbach. Yeah, here it is. So yeah, let's try to watch some of this video where this dude lectures and explains about Feuerbach, and then I'll get back into Marx's economic and philosophical manuscripts. And then we'll go to Marcuse, Herbert Marcuse. Right, of course, he's going to extrapolate on some of these ideas. Right, within their psychological and social impact, right? And of course, he's going to be echoing some of those very strange sentiments about alienation, but he's going to extrapolate about alienation based on the technological society, right? So Marx is doing it. So Feuerbach is doing it in terms of God, right, and religion and nature, right? Right. Marx is doing it in terms of the products of our labor again, right? And then finally, Uncle Teddy's doing it, right? But yeah, let's go back. Let me go back to the beginning of this here.
What is the relationship between being, existing, and thinking? In the old times, he says, from the very early times when men still completely ignorant of the structure of their own bodies under the stimulus of dream apparitions, came to believe that their thinking and sensation were not activities of their bodies, but of a distinct soul which inhabits the body and leaves it at death. So because of dreams, we came to believe that there was a thinking element within us, which was not our physical bodies. There was something non-physical within us that did the thinking. And he's saying the main reason we thought that is because of dreams. Because in dreams, people appear to us who were dead. And people appeared to us that were not there. So we thought that that's their soul speaking to us. And from there, we developed the idea of the soul, he says. And from there, the second step was the view that the soul could live beyond the body. The body died, but the soul existed, since people who were dead were also coming in my dreams. This slowly over time.
So you see this in the Phaedo, okay, which is a dialogue written by Plato, right, where Socrates is on his deathbed, right? And Socrates basically talks about this dualistic nature, right, or this separation between body and soul, right? And he talks about the rational being, and it's pretty clear that Plato may have taken this either from Pythagoras, right, because Pythagoras talks about the transmigration of souls and reincarnation, right? But there's also ideas coming from before, right? Okay, from the Hindus, right? And of course, we read a passage from the Gita, right, where Krishna explains to Arjuna, right, that the body can die, but the soul will not perish. Right, and he explains this to him as he's telling him to rush into battle, right? So yeah, it's interesting stuff that goes back to maybe really ancient ideas, right? Maybe Hindu ideas or maybe even pagan ideas, right? About the transmigration of the soul, right?
Leads to the evolution of religion. You can read this book by Robert Wright if you're more interested. The primitive religions were basically all personifications of natural forces. Gods were the personification of natural forces. Thunder and lightning and fire and water and rain and sky and earth. All of these things were basically gods. Monotheism developed as a process. Out of the many more or less limited and mutually limiting gods, there arose in the minds of men the idea of the one exclusive God of monotheistic religion. So all the powers of these different gods, some that were kings that had been elevated to the level of God, some that were natural forces that we were calling God, some that were just, some force that was roaming around a tree or something that we thought, this tree is whatever. All of that is now said, no. Or if we combine all of the different forces of nature and everything that we see, that is the one God. Did God create the world, or has the world been in existence for eternity? Became the main debate of philosophy. Because the philosophers were the ones that believed that the matter had always existed in some form or the other. The matter was eternal. Whereas the other side, scholastics, the religious scholars, etc., believed that God had always existed and he had created matter. And there were obviously attempts to reconcile both, that maybe matter had existed but not in any form, and that God had given matter form, etc., and so on. So there were many attempts to reconcile both, but these were the two major positions. That there was the spiritual element that had been eternal, and that had created the world of matter, or vice versa, that matter was eternal, and from it had arisen the spiritual element, i.e. thinking.
Okay, so this idea, okay, he's going to get into the separation between thinking and being, right? Because this is essential to understand the divine, right? But see, as I said, there's three main components, right? In order for man to become like God, God had to become like man. And this becoming, remember I told you, is nature itself, because nature is the realm of becoming, right? The realm of spirit, or the realm of mind, right? That is really the realm of being itself, right? Where things don't change, where things are impermanent, right? So you have first the separation of God and nature, right? Remember, he said that gods used to be in nature, right? Or part of nature, right? This is the first step, right? The second step is that they create this notion, right? That the one God combines all the natural forces, right? Then this third notion, which is of matter itself. Is matter eternal, or did God create matter, right? Now, this was the debate between Greek philosophy, right, and Christian metaphysics, right? In order to dismiss the notion that matter was eternal, or that the spiritual force came out of matter or emanated from matter, which is what Heraclitus basically says, right? That there's strife within matter, which sort of represents the churning of this logos or this mind within nature, right? But he thought all of this was one substance. Okay, so there's nothing separate, right? Now, it's within this idea, right? And of course, Parmenides said that thinking and being are one and the same thing, right? So he didn't separate thinking and being, right? So it's only when you try to separate thought and being, right, do you come up with nature as a category of becoming, and then you have to figure out whether matter is eternal or not, and how it relates to thinking, and whether God created matter, which is the Christian position, and basically, at this stage, popularly speaking, it's a Jewish position too, and maybe a Muslim one too, right? That God is separate from matter, right? And of course, they had to argue that God created the world ex nihilo, right? But this whole exchange separates God from nature and thinking from being. And of course, this was the deists that forced them into this, right? Because the deists said that God simply molds matter, right? Which means he shapes it, which means it always existed, right? So thinking has to interact with being. An immaterial mind has to interact with the world in order to change it, right? Anyways.
So for philosophers, what was primary could be either spirit or matter. For the church, of course, it was spirit. And within the church also, there was a big debate. Did God create the world, or has the world been in existence eternally? So these were the two camps. Those who said that primarily there is the spirit were he refers to as idealists. And the ones who said what exists primarily is matter, and from which develops the spirit, within which develops the spirit. Spirit, in other words, thinking, is nothing other than matter thinking about itself. Those were the materialists. These are the two great camps of philosophers. Theologians and philosophers all are divided into these two major big camps. He says,
right. So he said either you have mind separate from nature, or you have mind arising from dead matter. Right, which obviously we have a problem from that second option. Right, the emergence of mind from dead matter. Right. So because it seems untenable. But yeah, let's go on.
In history, okay? Whether spirit is eternal or precedes matter, or whether matter precedes spirit. Here, spirit is not being used in the sense of God. It can be, but not necessarily. Spirit is anything. It is the entity that thinks, the thinking element. The second question of philosophy was the identity of thinking and being, which means that, okay, we are thinking about the world.
Okay, thinking and being. And I think, as I said, Parmenides already said, the possible is the actual. The same thing for thinking is the same thing for being, right? Right. So he connected the two, right? But it's important to know how the notion of mind first becomes dislodged from spirit or nature, and then it becomes a product of matter itself, epiphenomenon of the material world, right? So these are the two movements that are vastly important, right, for the quote-unquote evolution of thought, right? But of course, we know that this is actually a move right from the connection between spirit and mind, right, to mind being located within man, to then it being, as I just stated, a product of matter, right? A product of the matter itself, right? As he's explaining here, right?
We're thinking about being. Is our thinking identical with what exists? The identity of thinking and being means whether a thinking is able to accurately reflect about the world that we're thinking about. So he says over here as well, the majority of philosophers said, yes, the human beings have the capacity to be able to objectively grasp the world. Doesn't mean that they've grasped it objectively, but they have the capacity to understand it correctly. Whereas there were some scholars who were skeptical about that, said, no, it can't be done, and so on. For Hegel, the world is a gradual realization of the absolute idea, which absolute idea has existed somewhere from eternity, independent of the world and before the world. Okay? So for Hegel, this absolute idea has always existed and will always exist. It's from eternity. It's like God, except it's not like the Christian God. It's like Hegel's own abstraction.
Yeah, so, yeah, I agree. I actually agree, Jake. You know, this idea that thought is separate from being, right? That's a crazy concept, right? Actually, the stupidity of it is confounding, right? But yeah, this whole concept that they invented, right, to try to either invent matter, right, or try to invent this principle that guides nature because they wanted to subject nature to this principle of mind, right? It's actually pretty interesting, right? Why they went down that route, and you could see why the deists, the philosophers, and the religious people sort of followed suit, right? Because they didn't want mind to arise from matter, right? Because that would diminish this thing called spirit, right? So, so it's pretty interesting, right? They wanted it. They didn't want the soul to get caught up in the murky waters of becoming, right? But yeah. Yeah, this is pretty much the only show on the internet that has no AI filters at this point. Yeah, they're just not AI making the music, no AI planning the presentations, no AI. You know, creating entertainment for the show or walking you through the various talking points. Right? I mean, it's just fascinating. I mean, right? Almost all the shows are either planned by algorithm or some sort of AI computing at this point.
Well, I gotta defend myself at that point. If that's how I'm gonna answer it, not mine either. Mine's not either. I call that Jim Bob for his bullshit with responding AI as well. So
Jim Borb.
Jim Borb.
Here, hold on. Yeah, we got this guy right here. Oh wait, where'd it go? Oh, here it is.
You should be seeking this knowledge to expose evil. That's something Christians are supposed to do.
We don't seek knowledge. That's Gnosticism.
You don't seek
Don't
knowledge.
be looking for knowledge out here.
Don't be looking for that knowledge now. Don't be looking for that knowledge now, you hear? That's Gnosticism.
That's for the masters out here.
Yeah. Well, let's see what our friends. We are here. We are brown-skinned. We are listening to a brown-skinned man explain the nature of the universe, being and becoming. And we are the Pajit readers. Holla back, son.
outdrawn the concept of God. So, for thought to know itself within the Hegelian system is not hard, or for thought to know itself correctly is not hard. There is no difficulty in the identity of thinking and being, because the thing that's doing the thinking is doing the thinking about the thing doing the thinking. In other words, the thing that's doing the thinking is thinking about itself. So you can think about yourself and grasp yourself objectively. Hume and Kant, on the other hand.
Yeah, and just to explain what he actually said, right, is the dual aspect monism of Spinoza, where thinking is the idea of being, right? And being is sort of the physical extrapolation, right, of thoughts itself, right? So there's a one-to-one relationship with thinking and being because they're both extrapolations of each other, right? But they work on the same plane. Therefore, Spinoza declares that nature is God, right? He thinks there's no separation between the spiritual and the material, right? And this is the wild stuff that certain philosophers, but obviously, you know, Hegel was shining Spinoza's boots pretty much. I mean, like he didn't think of anything himself, right? But yeah, he's basically just building off of what Kant and Spinoza already laid down, right? But yeah.
But the skeptics, they said, no. It's not necessarily the case that we can objectively understand the world. Hume said the reason is that we cannot grasp causation. Causation doesn't actually exist in the world. The only thing that exists in the world is constant conjunction. Things happen together, I admit that. They have a high probability or a low probability of having together. But the idea of causation is something that we have put on top of things that constantly happen together. They do not necessarily always have to happen together. So if I drop something, it doesn't necessarily always have to fall. The fact that it does is just constant conjunction, not causation. On the other hand was Kant. Kant said you can't know the thing in itself. Okay, why can't you know the thing in itself? Because the thing, you can only know the idea of the thing. You can only grasp what your mind is thinking, and you're grasping that from sensations. And then you have a whole series of categories in your mind, innate categories. Causation is one of them, space and time and relation, etc., that help you make sense of that stimuli, those empirical sensations. So you never are able to fully understand the thing in itself. The only thing you can understand is the idea of the thing in itself. I'll have to put it this way, you know, have you ever heard this? Have you guys ever heard this dialogue? You're not in love with me, you're just in love with the idea of being in love. You've heard it? Okay, I feel sorry for you already. So Kant is...
Yeah, every brown man's heard that. God damn. How much more pain do we need? But yeah, anyways, what's interesting is, you know, this whole idea of, you know, thinking and being, right? That the thing in itself, right, sort of escapes because you can never separate mind, right, from what it's looking at, right? So this sort of quasi-phenomenology that's already part of the sort of correspondence theory of truth, and sort of why it collapses in on itself, right, why it's sort of an epistemological straitjacket, right, is quite evident right there, right? And this is why Hegel came up with all these weird notions, like he's the universal mind realizing its own existence through the spirit of the world history or whatever nonsense he came up with, right? A gobbledygook.
Like that. I don't know the chair, I know the idea of the chair. Okay? I don't know, I don't love the chair, I love the idea of loving the chair. Right? Same thing. And we can only interpret that thing from within the categories of thought that are already embedded within us. He thought this was, number one, a synthesis of empiricism and rationalism. And number two, it also left enough space open for free will to continue to exist and for some form of space for...
But doesn't that kind of explain the monstrous road, right? Because we create an idea of objects, and that idea seems to pervade, our ideas of those objects themselves, and they transform the objects in our relationship to the ideas. Right? So this is how the whole process of alienation seems to spark up, right? Is our separation between objects, right? Us trying to sublimate them and bring them into our, frame of reference, right? Through the process of conceptual frameworks, right? And then us becoming alienated from those objects themselves, right?
Religion to continue to exist.
So this is precisely what Marx is going to explain, and how he's going to explain with Feuerbach in terms of the religious outlook of man, right?
So what does Engels think about that? He says, if we are able to prove the correctness of our conception of a natural process by making it ourselves, bringing it into being out of its conditions, and making it serve our own purpose into the bargain, then there is an end to the Kantian ungraspable thing in itself. How do I...
No, what a stupid answer, right? The answer to the Kantian problem of the thing in itself is utilitarianism, right? And a brute utilitarianism, right? That's totally unconscious, right? Right? What a stale mind that guy was, Engels, right? A total buffoon.
know that I know the thing in itself. I know that I know the thing in itself because I am able to make the thing not just for...
By the way, Engels is the guy who funded Marx's Communist Manifesto, right? His daddy was a rich industrialist, right? He didn't have the chops to write what Marx wrote, but he funded it. So Engels is a real high-class buffoon.
But for me, I'm able to make it do the things that I want it to do. I'm able to make it out of the things that are not it. I'm able to produce it, create it. That means I have grasped it correctly. The only criteria, therefore, of whether or not you have grasped the thing in itself, you've grasped the objective truth, whether you've achieved the identity of thinking and being, for Marx and Engels, is praxis. Whether or not you are able to, when you put your theory into practice, and yes, the results that you predict are the results that you get, you know that you understood the thing correctly. Your theory is correct. If you don't get the results you expect, if you're not able to create that, then your theory is wrong. You haven't understood what is going on. You haven't understood the process. So he says, okay, the discoveries of science have already shown us that we can know the thing in itself. And we do. We develop that, and so on. So Kant has been defeated by the development of science, he's saying. Both the materialist and the idealist philosophers were being pushed by the development of natural science and industry in a similar direction. Now,
there's a key term, right? What did Engels say? And remember, Engels referred to Marx's theory as scientific socialism, right? He said both materialists and the idealist philosophers were being pushed by the development of natural science and industry, right? So it's technology that's causing the ideological shift.
By the development of natural science and industry in a similar direction. Now, idealists could not ignore, they were also reading the scientists. Materialists were also reading the scientists. And the new scientific discoveries were leading people in a peculiar direction. Hegel, for example, had already incorporated many of the new ideas in natural science into his idea.
Okay, here's our main dude, Feuerbach, right? And his relationship to Marx theory, right, is primarily, as I was explaining earlier in the show, it's through this concept of alienation, right? Alienation from God, alienation from man, alienation from nature. As I explained, those are the three contestants, right?
Metaphysics is now out of date. He's the first one really to do this effectively. Whether you're a materialist or whether you're an idealist, doesn't matter. For Hegel, he's saying, science, look at all the discoveries we've made. We've already proven that nature is not stationary. Although, when he actually spoke about nature, he was not so well informed. He may have made a lot of mistakes in his examination of history, etc. But his fundamental principle was correct, that all of these things, philosophy, history, our understanding, nature, all of these things have a history, are in the process of development, of evolution. Feuerbach is finally driven to the realization that the Hegelian pre-mundane existence of the absolute idea, the pre-existence of the logical categories before the world existed, is nothing more than the fantastic survival of the belief in the existence of an extra-mundane creator. That the material, sensuously perceptible world to which we ourselves belong is the only reality, and that our consciousness and thinking, however supersensuous they may seem, are the product of a material bodily organ, the brain. So Feuerbach then overturns Hegel and says, Mr. Hegel, you have created this whole idea of the idea sitting outside of really existing human beings. In fact, the only thing that exists are really existing human beings who are thinking about their own existence. So Feuerbach comes back now to materialism. He has to overthrow that last remnant of idealism. Matter is not a product of mind, but mind itself is merely the highest product of matter. This was the conclusion of Feuerbach. Mind does not exist independent of matter from eternity, in the form of the spirit, the Geist, etc.
So, in other words, I don't know how. I mean, obviously, I could do a second-class job and just explain that, oh, yeah. I mean, most people don't even explain that, Marx was a young Hegelian, right? They don't explain anything about Marx's ideological background, right? But what's the, obvious bridge between, Hegel and Marx, right? Hegel's spiritualism and Hermeticism and basically Kabbalism, right? And then and the staunch materialism of somebody like Marx, right? And his sort of Prometheanism, right? And his sort of turning against this Christian ideal, right? It seems to be there's a bridge there through Feuerbach, right? Who's not only turning against religion, but is a staunch materialist, right? Anyways.
But rather, it is an abstraction that Hegel has derived actually by looking at real history, just as Marx talked about the idea of the fruit being extracted from all the different kinds of fruit that exist. In the same way, Hegel has come up with this idea of Geist by extracting from all the different kinds of societies, but he's placed it outside of history, existing from all eternity.
Yeah, Geist, get this. What does Geist mean? It pretty much means spirit or mind, depending on which way you slice the pie. Right, so you understand that in German philosophy, right, this notion is pretty much the same thing, right? Spirit and mind. Which, maybe that's owing to Spinoza, but I'm not really sure. But
that's not correct. Only the science of mechanics at this time had really properly developed fully. Chemistry was very poorly developed, other things were very poorly developed. But because of astronomy, mechanics was highly developed. Motion of bodies at this time.
Yeah, that's right, Frank. Geist is where the term ghost comes from. Yeah. So Geist
was a highly developed science. The application of the standards of mechanics to processes of a chemical and organic nature actually created the first French materialists. They took the ideas in science and then generalized them over philosophy. What were the main ideas? Those were mechanical ideas, mechanics, and they applied them to humanity. And that's why they came to the conclusion that just as the solar system is like a gigantic machine that operates in accordance with a mechanical principle, so too am I, the human being, basically a machine that operates in accordance with mechanical principles. But of course, a human being is not a mechanism. It's a chemical, organic thing. And organic scientific ideas about how organisms function and how chemistry functions were very underdeveloped at that time. So the only thing they could come up with at this particular point in time was that man is a machine. And so their conception of nature was also rather mechanical and therefore also very metaphysical. Nature was considered by them to be immutable, unchanging. Nature was unhistorical. Even Hegel made some of these same mistakes. In fact, even when they looked at history, they looked at it as a mechanical process and as a fixed sort of unhistorical process. History itself was unhistorical. The Middle Ages, they regarded the mechanistic materialists of the French Enlightenment were regarded as mere...
Yeah, this is because when you bring nature, right, you have to separate it from the realm of being, and basically what they get is this whole notion, right, that nature is eternal, right? And with this notion that nature is eternal, you have the unchanging, fixed laws of nature, right? And these mechanistic principles, right, seem to relate to how the mind perceives nature as well, right? So it's really imposing certain ideas about how we understand nature, right, through these mechanistic principles. And of course, the machine metaphor, right, is a total dualistic framework, right? Because it's comparing nature to man's creations, right? It's not a sort of naturalistic monism, right? It's far from that, right? But yeah, anyways, in my opinion.
Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, were regarded as mere interruption of history by 1,000 years of superstition and barbarism and ignorance. They failed to see that the whole period of the church, what was called the Middle Ages, also had very important vital developments in that entire period of history. They just discounted the entire period because they were so against the church that they could not see anything positive in that entire period where over Europe, Christianity was hegemonic and dominant, which is wrong. And now, by the way, Engels writes this 150 years ago. Now, by the way, so many historians have done so much work on looking at the Dark Ages and saying, well, the Dark Ages were not really as dark as depicted by the Enlightenment intellectuals. At this time now, new discoveries come about. 3 big new discoveries. The discovery of the cell. Before this period in history, before Robert Hooke, people didn't know that all life has the same building blocks, the cell. He took Galileo's lenses and made a decent microscope out of it. Others had also done that. He made a very good microscope. He developed it further. And then when he turned it on human tissue and animal tissue and other things, he discovered that at the foundation of all organic life was the same thing, the cell. He was the one who named it the cell. The transformation of energy was discovered, how one form of energy can be changed into another form of energy, electricity into magnetism and vice versa, electricity into heat and light and so on. And finally, Darwin's theory of evolution, which had convinced people that nature also had a history. It was not metaphysical. These 3 main discoveries challenged this metaphysical view of life. But overall, the worldview of philosophy still had not changed. It was too early to establish the interrelation of these discoveries to a bigger picture, to a philosophical worldview. Feuerbach was too isolated in his village. He had the capacity, he said. He was so...
Okay, so there's 3 key theories, right, at the cusp of the 1800s, right, during the occult revival, right, the birth of Zionism, right, and also the beginning stages of the Industrial Revolution, right? Okay, those 3 theories that I've been talking about that point towards progress of man, right? One is Hegel's idea, right, of the world spirit, right, that was evolving, okay, the spirit of freedom that's evolving, right, throughout world history, right? Okay, and so he's talking about the collective notion of humanity, right, idealizing itself, separating itself from nature through this notion of mind, right, through this notion of universalism, right? Okay, so there you have Hegel, right? The second idea is the idea of Darwin, right? Remember, Darwin was talking about how we could progress, right, okay, to a higher evolutionary stage. And he said the gaps between us and the monkeys would become far greater, right, eliminating all the brown races of the world, right? So there'd be a bigger gap between the monkeys and the white people, right? So this progress throughout the ages, right, represented a strengthening of evolution itself, right? So there's a progress in terms of their evolutionary terms. There's also the notion of the coming of the Messiah, right, as the coming of Christ consciousness into the world, right? This was an idea thought of by Helena Blavatsky, and she combined Eastern occultism and Western occultism and Eastern mysticism, right? And of course, they talked about the New World Order and all this type of stuff, right? So yeah. So there's all these separate notions of progress in the 1800s. There's also the notion of Zionism, right? And basically David Ben-Gurion had said that all the countries will become federated courts of Israel. Right? And Israel will be the supreme court of mankind, right? And this idea from the book of Isaiah of a sort of world restoration, right, coming forth by the Jews returning to Israel and obtaining a ruling state in the world. Right? This became linked with Christian eschatology, Christian Zionism, and so on and so forth. Right? And of course, Marx was part of some of these millenarianist organizations, right? Like the League of the Just, right? Anyways.
So radical for his time that society rejected him, he couldn't get a job, etc. He moved back to his village. He had a little business, his wife's business. He ran that business for a while, then wo thap ho gaya, and then poor guy had no money. Okay, that's what happens to philosophers, I have to tell you. Same thing happened to Karl Marx. Too far ahead of your time, society doesn't like you very much. Anyway, he could have done it, says Engels. He had the mind for it, but he was too isolated to know all of these changes and so on that were happening at that time. He was too stuck in looking at just that particular framework that he had created and further developing it. Now, many people distort what is meant by idealism. Idealism does not mean belief in ideals. It's totally wrong, he says. This view exists only in the uneducated German Philistine. If you're uneducated, you think, oh, Temur Rahman is a very idealistic young man. You say that, right? So you say, from that you can say, Temur is an idealist. But that's not what we mean in philosophy when we use the term idealism, okay? Naturally, of course, everything that sets men acting must find its way through your brain. You think about everything that you act on, that's given. But if we think that this is the definition of idealism, then materialism cannot even conceptually exist. No one can act without thinking. So if we say, no, thoughts are what create action. Obviously, bhai, but where do those thoughts come from? And are those thoughts independent of matter? And is there a thought that existed from all eternity that predated matter? If you look at the question in this particular way, then you're an idealist. But if you look at the question in this way, that your thoughts are the result of your environment, and the environment, the society, the social relations in which you're born, and that society is the result of a historical process of the development of productive forces which has created an economic system within which you are placed in a certain position, but in lumps or whatever, then you have a materialist understanding of the world. Idealism is not the belief in the inevitable progress of humanity. That's also the wrong definition. Okay? The materialists like Diderot, etc., were also committed to the idea that humanity will progress. So all these three ideas, 1, 2, 3, about idealism are just people who are uneducated who say these things. They don't know what it means. And the real reason why people say these things about idealism and materialism, they often say about materialism, the propaganda of the priests actually equated materialism with gluttony, drunkenness, lust of the eye, lust of the flesh, arrogance, stupidity, avarice, covetousness, profit hunting, stock exchange, swindling. And whenever you encounter this definition of materialism and you say, materialism means that you are really in love with material things, it's totally a wrong definition. Philosophically, that's not what it means at all. This was just the propaganda of the church against materialism. That's not what the philosophers mean. So the propaganda of the priests equated idealism with belief in virtue, universal philanthropy, and in the general better way of life, and equated materialism with acquisition of material things. But a materialist philosopher could also be somebody who doesn't care about the acquisition of material things at all, as was the case with poor Karl Marx, who died in penury, as you know. And similarly, an idealistic philosopher may be very materially covetous, despite being epistemologically idealistic. So the two things have nothing to do with each other. What it really means is, what idealism and materialism really mean is, those who believe that ideas exist independent of matter, have existed before matter, or the idea, one idea or many ideas or whatever, but that ideas have an existence independent of the material world, are idealists. And those who believe that ideas are themselves the result of material organic organisms, thinking organisms made of matter, they are the materialists. By the way, you can also have thinking things that are not made of organic substances. Now, you can, in the future, you may have thinking things that are made of metal and silicon and so on, rather than organic substances. I'm made of carbon-based substances. This is made of silicon-based substances. Yet, is it possible that this thing could evolve in the future because of whatever we are doing to it, could evolve to become a thinking thing, a thing that is able to examine the world and think about the world and come up with new conclusions and ideas and so on? Is that possible? It is within the realm of possibility. You're shaking your head, but you must admit that, yes, it is possible, maybe not impossible, but maybe improbable, right? So that's it for today. That's the distinction between idealism and materialism.
When the
Yo. Paul and Slave calls me in the middle of all this, dude. The heck?
Paul.
I was
Yeah, he
trying to
came up,
find this.
maybe 2 shows ago. He came up. We had a good conversation. Pretty good stuff. Man, I can't remember if it was this last. I think it was not last Saturday, but the Saturday before that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen him on here in a while. I haven't. He's been
Yeah,
making rounds lately.
2 weeks ago. Here, let me look this up for you guys because it is a notable event, and I don't think that many people were cued into it. I mean, so let me actually try to see what it do. Oh yeah. See, so it's this episode 10 days ago, right? So if you go 10 days ago, let me show you guys this. So if you guys looking for a conversation like that, I know there's some crossover between the audience there, right? So yeah, this is on 10 days ago, part 81. Right, yeah. So we did what it do. But yeah.
I have Paul and Slave's personal number right now. I mean, his Google number. I could call him right now and ask him to dump the audience over here. Actually, perhaps he probably wouldn't.
like
because he has that whole call-in number, and I called in like hours ago, and he just called me back, and it called me back again.
He's juggling a few people's audiences. It's up to him.
I'm trying to bring everyone together so that we can be one.
Yeah, exactly.
But I was when you're playing that video, I was trying to find the TikTok I saw, but unfortunately I didn't like it or anything. This guy had an excellent breakdown about the problem reaction solution, the Hegelian dialectic between there's too much AI content. How are we going to track it down? How are we going to stop it from happening? And the enforcement of the verification, how we're going to have to identify ourselves to get on the internet in the future by 2030, he was laying out. And the only way, the way he was laying it out, is the only way we're going to be able to get online in the future to post and create content is that the technology is going to have to read our thoughts so that 24/7, so that it knows that it's genuinely made by humans and not AI. It was a fascinating. I was trying to find it. I cannot find it. Unfortunately, I didn't like it or anything.
Yeah, I mean, I went overboard with that whole video. I mean, we might have to come back to Mark's next time, because I do have some other little items I want to read and get into before we convene here, because yeah. But I will refresh the memory in terms of Marcuse and Hegel, and look at some of their key reflections. But yeah, then I got some ideas that I'm gonna break forward into. In terms of what do we got here? Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at certain ideas about Kaczynski, like weird conspiracy type of stuff connecting Epstein to John Brockman, right? Also Marvin Minsky, right? Also Stuart Brand's connection to Gregory Bateson, who did MK Ultra, and obviously I mentioned Henry A. Murray and his connection to different guys like Mumford, right? So there's lots of weird connections between obviously MK Ultra and the Unabomber fiasco, right? So there's a lot of preliminary information there. So yeah, let me go to Mark's here.
Do you know this offhand? I was wondering this earlier. I've never known what MK stands for in the Ultra. Do you know what it stands for offhand? MK?
No, but I know it's like part of Macy's conference, right? So maybe it's got something to do with Macy's conference, and right? I don't know.
Like
Yeah,
like the
but I don't
Macy's
know.
Day Parade.
I don't know if it's linked to that. I don't really know that much about Macy's Day Parade, but I know about the Macy's conferences and the study on the authoritarian personality. You know, so it's linked to two ideas, right? A Browns boy says Malta Knights. Funny, man. The
No, that
mind
makes
control.
sense.
Yeah,
I couldn't
yeah,
like MK is such a weird acronym. Like I don't know.
yeah,
I don't know what it means.
yeah. So this whole idea that you know, Marx is going in, he says the worker becomes a slave to his objects first, and he receives an object of labor. That is, he receives labor. And secondly, he receives the means of subsistence. The first enable him to exist as a worker, and the second as a physical object. I'm sorry, a physical subject. The terminus of this slavery is that he can only maintain himself as a physical subject so far as he is a worker, right? So he becomes slaves. He becomes a slave to his objects and hence becomes a physical subject, right? So he says anyway, he says that later. He says the more powerless becomes a worker, the more intelligence the worker has, the more witless is the worker, and the more he becomes a slave of nature. Okay, so this whole idea about becoming a slave of nature, right, is tying back to this idea of materialism or becoming a slave to your objects, right, or becoming alienated from your labor, right? So he says political economy conceals the alienation in the nature of labor. Now, I had some ideas. I was going to look at Locke and a whole notion of private property itself. Right, but here is the thing, this whole idea of alienation linked into this. He says the externalization of the worker only from one side, his relationship to the products of his labor, but alienation is shown not only in the result, but also in the process of production. In the production activity itself. How could the worker stand in an alien relationship to the product of his activity if he did not alienate himself from himself? In the very act of production. After all, alienate himself from himself. Right? See how the whole ideas of Kant, right? To quote our Professor Buddy, right? How he said we could become estranged from the thing in itself because of our conceptualization of ideas, right? Oh wait, where am I? Yeah, so he says shown not only in the result but also in the process of production and the producing activity itself. How could the worker stand in alien relationship to the product of his activity if he did not alienate himself from himself in the very act of production? After all, the product is only a resume of activity of production. If the product of work is externalization, now here's this idea of externalization. Product itself must be active externalization. Externalization of activity, activity of externalization. Only alienation and externalization, right, which is the practical aspect, right? Because alienation is the internalization of externalization, right? It says only alienation and externalization in the activity of labor itself is summarized in the alienation of the object of labor, right? Okay, that's too kind of going off board here. Let's move to Marcuse, right? Because we don't have that much time, right? So let's just move quickly to Marcuse, right? But we did a good breakdown of some ideas in relation to Feuerbach here, right? Because we got Marcuse and we got some ideas from Scherbina on the dangers of technology. We got some ideas on the honeypotting itself.
There's a honeypot. Where's that at?
Uh-oh, slow down there, Winnie the Pooh. Let's not dive headfirst into the traps, the trizaps. Yeah, blessings to all the people that are here. I appreciate you guys. We're gonna play some music in a minute here. I'm gonna read just a few lines here. Okay. I planned way too much material, but I don't want to go over 2 hours. This is too much. Too much streaming, right? We're gonna be here forever tomorrow. So let's just cut it down. We got next Tuesday. Okay, obviously there's last Tuesday for the people who didn't see last Tuesday's show. We did a whole entire introduction to all these topics. Okay, last Tuesday, right? Where I read plenty of Marx. I read plenty of Marcuse. Anyways, let's go on here. This from the paralysis of criticism. He says if we attempt to relate the causes. I thought I saw Hank in here. Was Hank in here? If we attempt to relate the causes of the danger to the way in which society is organized and organizes its members, we are immediately confronted with the fact that advanced industrial society becomes richer, bigger, and better as it perpetuates the danger. The defense structure makes life easier for a greater number of people and extends man's mastery of nature. Under these circumstances, our mass media have little difficulty in selling particular interests as those of all sensible men. The political needs of society become individual needs and aspirations. Their satisfaction promotes business and the common weal, and the whole appears to be the very embodiment of reason. And yet this society is irrational as a whole. Its productivity, its destructive free development of human needs and faculties, its peace maintained by the constant threat of war, its growth dependent on the repression of real possibilities for pacifying the struggle for existence, individual, national, and international. This repression, so different from that which characterizes the preceding, less developed stages of our society, operates today not from a position of natural and technical immaturity, but rather from a position of strength. The capabilities, intellectual and material, of contemporary society are immeasurably greater than before, which means that the scope of society's domination over the individual is immeasurably greater than before. Okay, so there's the whole concept of alienation in a technological society. Right? Our society distinguishes itself by conquering the centrifugal social forces with technology rather than terror on the dual basis of an overwhelming efficiency and increasing standard of living. To investigate the roots of these developments and examine their historical alternatives is part of the aim of the critical theory of contemporary society, a theory which analyzes society in the light of its used and unused or abused capabilities for improving the human condition. But what are the standards for such critiques? Certainly, value judgments play a part. Okay, and there we have the entire struggle between knowledge and values. Right, as Skolomowski explained, the more one goes up, the more the other goes down. Right, so join us tomorrow in these philosophical discussions where I'm going to talk about futurism and its many implications. Right now I'm going to play some music, and then we're going to move on to I know I shouldn't do this when we got the highest viewers now, but it is what it is. This is just a flow of my show. I'm going to play music.
I would just, because man, of all the people that need to be on this stream listening right now, it's made by Jim Bob. Okay, he was responding to an Alan Watts AI video as if it was a real voice of Alan Watts and rebutting and refuting. Dude, it was ridiculous. He needs a lot of help out here, man.
Oh man,
you should be seeking this knowledge to expose evil. That's something Christians are supposed to do.
We don't seek knowledge. That's Gnosticism.
Yeah, let's not go too hard on him. He got stomped last night. He got ragdolled by Corinth and John Mosman and Adam Dole and pretty much everybody. You know, it's
Well,
like
he invited into his space. I don't know what it is. He's like the title sound. It was like 8v1 or something, like 8 atheists versus Jim Bob or some shit the other day. I didn't see the title yesterday, but it was a 2 versus 1, I guess, last night. But it's like,
yeah, that's Taco's lame ass show because Taco's show is the same show every single time. I mean, so I have no idea what to do about that, right? So I just cannot watch Tacos because it's the same motherfucking show every single show. He doesn't switch it up. Like, I'm only one man. He's got an entire crew of people, an entire Discord of people. These people got production teams. You know, they can't come up with new material every single show. And, you know, they have to either borrow material or, I mean, I don't understand, man. But yeah, it is what it is. You know what I mean?
it's
The whole
unfortunate,
thing with
man.
me is I get bored. I couldn't get up here, I mean, just say the same thing or say the same type of shit about the same type of people. I mean, it'd just be like, you know what I mean? Like, I like a thing where it's like no repeats on some shit, but I don't know, man. But yeah,
No,
maybe
I
that's
agree.
not.
I agree.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, most of these people out here on the internet with these mainstream streamers, they are not on the same page with that. They just repeat themselves over and over again until their audience leaves them, and they're like, "What happened? I thought you guys were happy."
Yeah, like right here, like we did Hegel, we did Confucianism versus Taoism. Okay, we read a bunch of different ideas from Moldbug. Okay, okay, we looked at various ideas from the occult. Okay, I've read ideas about Gnosticism, the Gospel of Judas, right? The various ideas of the Sethians and the Ophites. We went through a whole slew of Jewish history. We did a whole series on Friedrich Nietzsche. We did an entire series on feminism. Right? These motherfuckers are slow, and this is only 2 years of this shit. And right, we've already made a mountain of tapes and material. Right, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of just me talking about shit.
I'm
Right, I
pretty.
mean,
I'm pretty fucking slow. If they're behind me, dude, they gotta catch up, dude. If I'm catching on to this, like,
you
dude.
still got that show up? I might play that show tomorrow night.
Oh yeah,
The
it's
one we
still
did.
up. I'll leave it up. That was one of my.
Yeah.
That might have been the best show I've done. I was pretty happy with that one.
Yeah, we'll put that up tomorrow night. We'll put Avian Buddha up tomorrow night. Me and Avian Buddha did a cool show together with a friend of his who's a neuroscientist. Incredible discussions we had about the philosophy of mind. Right? I've done a few different things on philosophy of mind, Plato and Aristotle, and a bunch of different other philosophers as well. Right? So we gave tons of explanations on a whole bunch of issues. We read 6 different translations of the Tao Te Ching. We read Rousseau. We read Nietzsche. We read John Locke. Right? We read lots of different thinkers. We read Industrial Society and Its Future by Uncle Teddy. We're over halfway through Technological Society by Jacques Ellul. Right? And we've read and explained all of these things. Right? From the primary sources. Right? We've analyzed texts. We've looked at interviews and explanations by experts and thinkers. Right, we've given our own explanations and opinions. We've had debates about the various theories. Right, so the type of stuff that's going on out here, right, where people think they could, you know, talk about, you know, their bumper sticker philosophy, right, or talk about their vain scientific approach, right. I mean, it's just really sad out here, right. You know, it's just really, really pathetic. I mean, but yeah, you mean, anyways, let me get up in this music, and we'll be back in a little bit. Blessings, guys. But yeah, I mean, I searched far and wide, man. There's no shows out here. It's all trash, right? Sadly,
There's a lot of trash, no doubt.
it's like all feds. It's all trash. It's all rigged. It's all grifters. Fucking fake drama LARP shows or fake you know, ironic, not funny comedy show. Like they're like Steve Carell or some stupid shit. Or they're gonna call my family up and then talk about it on like Toilet Bowl Birth and do his fucking Crank Yankers fucking comedy show. Right? Call me with a real fucking number. Right? These people are fucking heinous creatures, right? Literally. And right. Their whole goal is to get people to stop talking to each other. Right? That's the goal. right? Fuck this whole thing about gaining internet fame and doing all this stupid shit. The goal is to have you not talk to other people who you would correspond with on certain ideas, right? So that you don't have friends, right? So you feel isolated, right? It is what it is, right? It's all working against you, folks, right? I'm just here to warn you. Blessings.
God's working for us, so
Exactly.
fuck all that.
Exactly. Right? And here's my testament to that. Is these 2 songs in this video compilation, right, about God working with me. Blessings, folks. And Mariah Carey.
We'll be right back.
Yeah. See that old dude?
Yeah.
He's chilling.
That's
Chilling.
does anybody, do you know any of the lore on that dude?
No.
Fascinating character.
Indeed. Especially how that white dude came up and bowed to him.
Right.
Definitely fascinating. But yeah, let me move on here and read a little bit of this. Now, I read this last time. Obviously, I gave a whole heart to heart about my own marital problems. People are going to clip that. It doesn't have to do with what's written here. Okay, just to clarify. But I was just
Hey,
talking about the problems
some of us aren't
meeting,
lucky enough to have marital problems.
meeting the women on the internet is what I was talking about. How the internet exacerbates the issues, and yeah, it's a huge issue, right? In terms of how the internet causes huge problems in the relationship. And so they're talking about these sites like Ashley Madison, right? So I don't know if you guys might have heard about this, but there is a whole a site specifically, I don't know who thought this was a good idea, dedicated to infidelity. So this is a recipe for honeypotting, and indeed they leaked out the list of the people who are involved with the website, folks. So yeah, somebody hacked into the website and they leaked out all the names of the people that were using it to cheat on their spouses, because it's a website, again, specifically directed for infidelity. So you could meet up with other married people. Insane, right? So
Really fucked up, dude. That's some backwards twisted shit.
It is. It is. Not to mention the Nexium cult ran by the Bronfman daughters and Roger Stone and all this crazy shit. And these people are obviously political pundits in our time, right? And obviously people like Epstein, right? So it's incredible stuff, right? So he writes here, right? Ashley Madison was actively promotes sexual affairs among married people, claims to have more than 25 million members. 2010 study by Case Western Reserve found that teenage hypertexting and hypernetworking were linked with range of risky behaviors, including smoking, drinking, drug use, and sexual activity. Hypertexting, defined as sending more than 120 messages a day, applied to 20% of all teens. Risk increases range from 40% more likely to smoke and use drugs. Now, I was talking about my own experience with this in high school, right? And just looking at the kids who were more inclined to use social media, right? They were the kind of kids that were involved in all sorts of, criminal like behavior, like drug use, right? And of course, they were the more promiscuous bunch, right? That were all on the social media websites, right? And they had like tons of followers in high school, or whatever.
Well, it builds
those
up
are the
their
worst
ego.
kids.
No matter what they're doing, it's like you're getting some sort of social acceptance. No matter what they're doing in their personal, private life, you don't really know. But they get online and they get these likes and engagements, so they feel like whatever they're doing in real life is justifiable.
Yeah,
I would
and of
presume.
course, there was kids putting videos of themselves, like doing all sorts of criminal activity and flaunting it, stealing property and flaunting that, right? Stealing property from their schools and flaunting that, filming themselves doing drugs, little girls filming themselves twerking, all sorts of nonsense, right? That all sorts of fucked up behavior that it seems to promote, right? And yet we don't look at the technology itself as enabling the bad behavior, right? We just say, well, these are delinquent kids that are doing this, right? But we've had an increase in this type of bad behavior and the ability to promote this type of bad behavior, right? With the idea that you might go viral or obtain 15 minutes of fame.
Right. The worse and more outrageous your activity, the more it's going to go viral.
Yeah, so this is like, of course, there's a huge problem when you get on social media about people comparing themselves doing stuff, going to wild parties and taking pictures with a Lamborghini with some rich guy and all this stuff. And of course, everybody wants to mimic this type of behavior. Right? They think, well, why don't I get out there and make myself available? I might go to rich parties and go to the swimming pool and get to ride in the Lamborghini and all this stuff, when obviously these are all staged events to pump up these people's social media profiles. It's fucking amazing, right? And of course, little kids want to mimic this type of behavior, right? It's extremely sad. It's creating a social atmosphere where people gravitate towards the most crass type of behavior, the most materialistic goals, and right, and they tend to flaunt that type of stuff, and they try to put each other down, right? When we should be trying to uplift the poor, right? But these people are trying to compare their material possessions to everyone else. And of course, this is accentuated by the online sphere, right? It's extremely deleterious behavior. And of course, it's linked to this social media. Hyper networking, defined as more than 3 hours per day on sites like Facebook, applied to 12% of all teens and was associated with 60% greater likelihood to have multiple sex partners. Well, obviously, the problem with the whole social media sphere is that you're able to have connections with people and keep that a secret. Right? So there's an increased ability to do that. Right? You're able to ghost people. You're able to have private communications with people. Right? Whereas you'd have to go into a community setting to accomplish the same thing back in the day. Right? You have to go in a community setting in public sphere to accomplish most of that. You have to go meet in a public place. Right? So these the ability for people to be like organizing crime and sex trafficking on Roblox and getting kids to brainwash them and commit crimes and all this type of stuff, all that stuff is increasing. Right? It's actually going through the roof. The last 5 or 6 of these shooters were basically people who got manipulated online, right? Totally brainwashed, and they chose and selected specific people who they could do that to, right? Who had no connections with people, right? Who were out on their own, who were isolated, yet they could get online and communicate with hundreds of people, right? So this is extremely dangerous to have people who are extremely disconnected from any community, go on here and then, feign connections with hundreds of people. Obviously possible today, right? Anyways, and it's hyper networking, right? That's the problem. Right, increasing your amount of associations and with people that you don't actually have personal relationships with. Right, if you heard something that comes from, if it doesn't come from someone you know or someone you know knows, don't believe it. Keep your circle small.
Oh yeah.
Rely on personal, relationships, and make sure that, here's a good one: plan your meetings so that you could meet your friends at the same scheduled times, right? So that you guys have a trust in each other, right? Instead of people meeting up at their own whim and ghosting each other and getting together whenever they feel like it, right? Actually forge true connections with people, right? Anyways, were you gonna say something, Truther?
I was just agreeing. Like, dude, fuck these online, like trying to reach out and connect with people online, dude. Fuck all that.
That's a recipe for disaster. Friends with strangers online could be dangerous fun. Fun with dangers online could be dangerous fun. Excuse me. Anyways, stranger danger. It says earlier it was shown that cell phone usage can cause brain cancer. We should not be surprised, therefore, to find psychological effects as well. A 2012 study of 28,000 children in Denmark found that cell phone use by pregnant women increases the likelihood of behavioral problems in children at age 7. Divan and colleagues, 2012, DIVAN, followed up on an earlier study that found similar results in a smaller cohort of 13,000. Those children showed an increased propensity for hyperactivity, attention deficit, and social interaction problems. Okay, so he's going to go through these problems one by one, right? But he says the problems recurred in larger groups with the greatest effects shown by children, both pre and postnatal exposure. Another behavioral issue is technology-induced violence in both children and adults. Huseman, 2007, S10, performed a review of multiple studies concluding that, quote, experiments unambiguously show that viewing violent videos, films, cartoons, or TV dramas, or playing violent video games cause the risk to go up. This is true of preschoolers, elementary school children, high school children, college students, and adults. Specifically, on the question of video games, Huseman's result confirmed that 2010 meta-analysis that showed that exposure to violent video games is a causal risk factor for increased aggressive behavior, aggressive cognition, and aggressive affect, and for decreased empathy. P and colleagues, 2012, found that social media use, internet use, and multitasking adversely affect young girls' social skills. This study of nearly 3,500 girls aged 8 to 12 correlated time spent on interactive media with social problems. Conversely, girls who spent the most time in face-to-face interaction with friends and relatives had the least social difficulties. The authors speculate that girls pick up considerable clues from facial expressions and bodily movements to develop their social skills, things that are lacking in media interactions. All right, anyways, we'll get back to that later.
My sister was talking to me last night about a book she got on it reminded me of this thing I've thought about several times. Why we communicate differently through writing versus like in real life conversations. and just writing in general, like, you know, letters and all that, versus like interpersonal relationships. And she has this whole, I have to press her about that. She hasn't looked at it yet. I'll press her about it and see what she discovers there. But I gotta jump off here. But great conversation, dude. I enjoyed the show. I gotta eat my dinner.
Yeah, blessings on me.
Get to bed.
Yeah, thanks for
Be
being
well.
here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Be well.
Yeah, peace, brother. Yeah, Quantum Epic, blessings. Mama Suli, I appreciate you. Yeah, we appreciate you out here. All you guys, Zephyr, obviously, laying in bed just said this. The music got me feeling like they found an exorcism on me. Yeah, blessings on me. I appreciate you. X, something happened. Owen made a mock debate with him and Andrew. Yeah, the little Owen and Andrew saga is pretty funny. We got made by Jin Bob in the chat. All right. Golden Renaissance, blessings. Yeah, let me move in here and read some of this. Now, we know that, as I was talking about, right, Epstein is linked to Minsky, right? And I don't know if you guys ever seen this documentary. I played parts of this documentary, especially John Brockman and Stuart Brand in this documentary. Now, Stuart Brand wrote The Media Lab, right? And of course, he was the student of Gregory Bateson. Right now, Gregory Bateson is one of the main architects of this idea of cybernetics, especially connecting it to society in general. Right? Okay, so it says here, right, that Brockman was exposed for his association with Jeffrey Epstein, along with other numerous people in the computer industry like Marvin Minsky and Bill Gates. And of course, Henry A. Murray conducted the experiments on Ted Kaczynski. Right? He was an associate of Timothy Leary. He was friends with Lewis Mumford, right? And of course, he was an associate it says in Hebrew language biography of Chaim Weizmann, showing Christiana Morgan had a liaison with Weizmann. Christiana Morgan is a person that Murray was recruited with in a sex cult ran by the psychologist Carl Jung. Right? So obviously Carl Jung and Gregory Bateson are like OSS agents, right? Which is the precursor of the CIA, right? So that's some of the backdrop information. Here's a quote by Henry A. Murray, right? This is an interesting quote. He says, Murray saw psychology and the new social sciences as destined to make a contribution to a world that can live in peace and harmony, in a new world order, with world laws, a world police force, and world government. The USA, according to Murray, is the abstraction of one world, which we are on the verge of creating. The lot has fallen to the U.S. to take over the direction of carrying out the last and difficult experiment, a global campaign of good against evil, by completely dedicating ourselves to the idea of a one world government. Right now, remember, I saw another guy who was part of the foundation of cybernetics, right, was Bertrand Russell. right, who wrote the Principia Mathematica, right, with Whitehead, right? And this whole notion of going towards a one world government is written in his scientific outlook, right? Okay, where he basically says a technocracy should guide society, right, including projects for eugenics. Right, and of course, this whole idea in Principia Mathematica, right? I believe that's a word. Is it called Principia Mathematica or Principia Mathematica? Principia. Yeah, I think the Principia is a Newton work, right? Principia. Principia? Yeah, Principia. Principia? Yeah, hold on. Let me look up what the work by Newton, by Russell and Whitehead is called. Russell and Whitehead, Mathematica. It's something Mathematica. Principia Mathematica. Okay, so that is what it's called. Principia Mathematica. Right. So they basically invent the whole coding language. Right. So there's a whole link between Whitehead, Russell's work, the notion of cybernetics and the coding language. Right. The idea of Bateson and his inclusion of cybernetics into the philosophy of mind. Right. And his whole influence on the MK Ultra situation, right? So all of these are interesting features of the situation, right? And of course we have Stuart Brand. Right? And of course Stuart Brand is shown in the movie The Net, right? The internet, the Unabomber, and LSD. Right? He's connected to the Esalen Institute just as Henry A. Murray is, right? Okay, and the whole psychedelic culture, but mainly through his World Book, right? He created this thing called the World Book, and in it, there's a description about how to build a cabin in the woods like Henry David Thoreau. And of course, Uncle Teddy used this description to build his cabin in the woods. Right? So his cabin in the woods was modeled off of Walden. Anyways, let me read further here. Right? It says Brockman's friend Stuart Brand spearheaded the movement that drew on the 1960s counterculture to present the personal computer, a term he coined. He coined the term personal computer. Because I don't know if he's talking about okay, so he's talking about Stuart Brand there, right? So Stuart Brand coined the term personal computer. Right? So the goal was to make it a notion of personal, to tie it to the notion of personal empowerment, right? Right. Another graduate of Philip Exeter Academy like Mark Zuckerberg, Brand was deeply influenced by Marshall McLuhan, as well as cybernetics visionary Norbert Weiner, Gregory Bateson, and architect and designer Buckminster Fuller. Right? Buckminster Fuller had all these crazy utopian ideas, right? Okay, he was sort of a transhumanist, right? But also a sort of a utopian. Right? I think there's three ways to have like transhumanism, right? You want to accelerate evolution by combining human beings with machines. Right? Or you want a utopian goal, right, where humanity becomes one and starts exploring the space system, fake and gay space communism, FNGSC, as is colloquially termed, right? So you have various notions of transhumanism, right? So it says, first serving as a soldier in the U.S. Army, Brand worked at the Pentagon as a photographer. In 1961, he served in Vietnam. He studied design at San Francisco Art Institute and photography at San Francisco State College in 1962. In 1963, based on their mutual interest, Brand contacted Kesey, who invited him to join the Merry Pranksters. Okay, so he's got more ties, just like Timothy Leary, to the psychedelic culture, right? Anyways, I'm afraid we ran out of time. We're at 2 hours here, right? I want to leave it there, right? And yeah, thank you for joining us here on The Machine Lies, where we talk about the lies of the machine on the machine that lies. And you can't kill what you can't see. And what most people pay attention to and think is real is just flickering shadows on a screen, images of things that aren't even real. And the first step to blinding somebody is getting them to open their eyes. And the first step to seeing beyond the programming is to realize how you've been programmed. So I greatly appreciate you guys' time. Thank you, Lizard Tree, for being here. Thank you, Dark Priest. We got all the little homies in the house. We got Marty Young. Okay, we got Quantum. Blessings. Okay, I greatly appreciate you guys. All right. Last short video featuring was the right ton of stop reach. I don't know what this is about. Go check it out, folks. That sounds too complex. I'll ask the homie about that. Oh yeah, and blessings to our homie Frank Monday. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, I saw you in the chat out here. Mama Sue, blessings. Okay. All right, guys. I got to get up out of here. Thank you guys for being here with me. And yeah, I'll jam out with you guys for a little bit, right? Okay. Hang out with you guys. Play some music, right? Okay. And I greatly appreciate you guys' time, all right? Okay. Yeah, blessings, folks.
Yeah, it sound like a groove and shit. I spend so much time just thinking about nothing. Now it's time to turn that nothing into something, and see if that something wants to be with me. And we could be together, live happily. I spend so much time just doing nothing. I think it's time for me to start doing something. Find me a fun activity. Enjoy this life of liberty. Timeless, everything is. Time just keep on moving. I just keep on moving. Life just keep on moving. Keep on moving. Life outside my mind. That I can't tell if I'm in or outside my mind. It's time for me to come to reality and use my creativity. Timeless, everything is. Time just keep on moving. I just keep on moving. Life just keep on moving. Keep on moving. Life just keep on moving. Keep on moving. Timeless. Yeah, did it. Timeless. Timeless.
Somebody told me to deliver this message.
Everyday children are being abused. The sad part is most people don't listen to them.
To deliver this message.
This is one little girl's letter, and now I'm a voice. Dear mommy, yesterday's gone. The pain. Together like Columbo, many places yeah. It's like walking into a trap. It's a setup. Yeah, yeah. It's like trying to grasp the intangible. I contemplate, form the plan like Hannibal. Then demonstrate ideas more dangerous and radical. The facade is of a magnitude more huge than imaginable. I fell back when I saw it was a setup. See many sell their souls just to try to get that bread up. Now the devil got you and shit from your neck up. You were sitting duck, about to get stuck. Then these streets are rough. You can get snuffed for a couple of bucks like it's nothing. Small time hustling to get the ones in with the onion and white. But your game ain't right with that dumb junkie chick keeping your habit tight. Now your paper's short, Jack. Open the bus, tall stacks. On the run, lay it low, looking over your back. Crime life but you trap. Dog, you got a price on your head. You probably better off turning yourself into the feds. The cold edge of reality. The world without apathy. The game you meant to lose, so move with strategy. It's like walking into a trap. Double crossing snake who would shoot you in your back. Steal from your fam, a two-faced rap. We bust it down in a rap, that's my word is born. The devil is a slick cat with a face of illusion. Formless, changing and moving. Transparent, unproven. The many faces of illusion. Lies and confusion. The devil has many faces of illusion. The mind in flight, cruising high altitudes. Mostly fools dropping trash, y'all only drop jewels. Got the clues like Columbo, too ill with the drums, yo. Young boys try to step up, but they soon to get sundo. My being with the sun, so I shine light infinitely bright. For musical meditation, I find insight. My people know nothing but strife. Hard life, broken and divided. Stripped of our culture, raped till we a hybrid. Twisted with lies and greed. Wine and weed, see time we need, but there's no time left, B. Let's get the plan together, cause the scam real messy. Stay calm and ready, armed and deadly. For the modern game that's called in the 21st century. To be enslaved mentally, trip with false freedom, politics and religion. Truth is not a given, through understanding and wisdom. See it fall into position, the elusive demon. A man who can change his face, sex or race, then be gone with no trace. Like walking into a trap. Double crossing snake who would shoot you in your back. Steal from your fam, a two-faced rap. We bust it down in a rap, that's my word is born. The devil is a slick cat with a face of illusion. Formless, changing and moving. Transparent, unproven. The many faces of illusion. Lies and confusion. The devil has many faces of illusion. Illusion, 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 illusion.
sent from heaven, marked with the number 7. 1,000 rats cover the body, the human anatomy. Psychology, the chaos theory. Burning cathedral, marked for death by the eye of the eagle. A perfect cacophony, murderous sequel. Cold of the desert eagle. Nefarious vampire, words of desire. Romantic choir sang a song as I hung him in fire. Bending space and time. The mirror had Merlin's face in mind. Outside the haunted pyramid, covered in cloth, it rained blood and he studied the book of Thoth. One flesh, one God, and one ghost. One deal, one devil, and one host.
To the language of the mystic arts, examination now of a cryptic thought. Hidden in the map was a missing box, remembering the life of a city lost. Black as the night in the burning cross. A savage was the fight, ain't nobody that saw. Off in the night and the body was lost. In the sun is shining all day. Black with the birds singing in hallways. Black with the birds singing in hallways. Covered in the blood, we coming a long way. Covered in the blood, we coming a long way. As it is above, it's so below me. Tell me what I feel, there's no pain. Tell me if it's real, when it's real, it's okay. If it's real, it's okay. My pen is a sword, force tremendous power. The blacksmith, a dragon, live in the hidden tower.
sets of footprints placed ahead of the dirt, softened from teardrops, and overlooking the earth as the son of a moon, protected by a force field of pure fun. This I stand. A rally of unemployed, disgruntled words spawned from long journeys through somewhere. somewhere that only caused me pain as I strained my soul, cramming it with light so I could bring some there. I bleed the blood of a cold stone that roams without a shadow. I'm only deep enough to realize that I'm shallow. My head, I keep it up, but it's hard to keep it straight when you don't believe in love and you just can't cope with hate. Metal rust, leaves turn into dust as the difference between love and lust clarifies its trust. If you only had an hour to sum your whole life up, would you spend that hour saying that an hour ain't enough? I've escaped the shell that bound me to cowardice. Now I'm faithful to the wind, but compared to it I'm powerless. The first step was made, and it was a fair accomplishment. The pond was sitting still, so I threw a rock in it, and as my reflection rippled, it all became clear. Seasons always change, so there's no reason for fear. We made an autobiography of our pivotal years. It's all I got, and I'm giving it to you because I care. See, a lot of the time, humans as artists exist in a self-projected state of falsehood. We're either too close to our image to be objective in our perception, or too far away to be subjective in any matter. This only widens the void that social conformity introduced to our souls at birth. And so I write. But I don't write without the intention of objectivity or attention on the image, but only as an omnidirectional bridge between the several floating tunnel-structured realities present in comparable space and time. See, I don't write for the future, I write about the future for the present. I write with my past about the future for the present. On this I stand, the oasis of a limbo, adjacent to my generation, facing out the window, waiting for some ventilation, patient while the wind blows, graceful in its demonstration, overall innovation. I stand, a fountain of youth, sovereignty, 1,000 syllables more than a pound of flesh, a deep breath of achievement, a dream and a wake-up call, another hall of the quest. On this I stand, a letter to civilization. On this I stand, the purity of creation. On this I stand, a paradigm for self. On this I stand, a thank you for your help. On this I stand, my firstborn child. On this I stand, something for now. On this I stand, life, love, death. On this I stand, an album, glad you can relate.